Hello everyone, this is the Afro Avenger back with another album review, and today's album is Morning Phase by Beck. It was released February 21st of 2014. Some chart information: it peaked at number 3 on the US Billboard 200, number 1 on the US Billboard Top Alternative Albums, number 1 on the US Billboard Top Rock Albums, and number 1 on the US Billboard Top Tastemaker Albums. It was released under the labels Capitol and Phonograph, and its singles were Blue Moon, Waking Light, Say Goodbye, and Hard as a Drum. So without further ado, let's get this started. Now, I know this album came out in 2014, which was 2 years ago by this point, but this is an album that I've been meaning to review for many months, and I figured that now was as good a time as I need to talk about it. Now, this album is pretty famous for winning Album of the Year at 2015's Grammy Awards, beating out the likes of Beyonce, who seemed to be a shoo-in for that winner spot. An incredibly impressive upset, no doubt, but is this album really so good as to beat out Queen Bey? Let's find out. Now, if you know anything at all about Beck's music, or Beck as an artist in general, you know that he's among the most eclectic artists of the past decade. His albums spanning many different styles and genres of music, from folk to psychedelia to funk to avant-garde to alternative rock to many more. However, this was a bit of a step back for Beck in terms of how many styles of music he was working with. It wasn't, however, a step back in terms of quality, because the music on here is absolutely gorgeous and, in all truth, quite different from Beck's usual style of making music. This album is actually a sort of sequel to one of his previous albums, Sea Change, and in that way the music on both of these albums are quite similar, that being folk rock. The music, more often than not, is very dark and somber, and it's made all the more so with Beck's sleepy style of singing. Along with his signature acoustic guitar, Beck quite often incorporates very gorgeous, heavy, flowing string orchestras to add to the drama that the album brings. Perhaps one of the most striking differences about this album is the production style. Beck is quite well known for producing his records with a very lo-fi nature. This album, however, seems to really be a product of its time. Not even once does it feel lo-fi. It feels absolutely professional in every single way, perhaps giving Beck even more credibility as an outstanding artist and producer. One thing about this album, though, is that nearly every single track is slow or down-tempo. The only moderately up-tempo songs are Hard as a Drum and Blackbird Chain, and even then, those tracks aren't very fast either. On many of Beck's albums, he would have a good mixture of up-tempo tracks and down-tempo tracks, but on here, they're pretty much all slow ballads, so if you're hoping for some fun, exciting music or a mixture of both fast and slow songs, you might be disappointed because there is none of that, period. However, if you're hoping for a really emotional, deep, somewhat spiritual experience, then this is definitely the album that you're looking for. Now, it seems as though Beck had a bit more help on this album than he does on most of his albums. Many of his earlier albums had him playing nearly every instrument on every single track, but on here, while he does play the vast majority of instruments on most of the tracks, there are many tracks where other musicians are playing instruments that he would otherwise play himself. For example, Beck plays bass guitar on about 2 separate tracks, but on about 2 other tracks, Beck gets bass legend Stanley Clarke to play instead. Beck is certainly among the most versatile musicians of his day, and even on an album where he doesn't play every single instrument on every single track, he still shows it on this album and has proven himself time and time again how talented he is. Much of Sea Change was based upon Beck's thoughts and emotions after a rough breakup, and with this LP being a sequel, many of the songs deal with relationships, the woes of love, and trying to have a positive outlook on rather bleak situations. Many of the tracks reflect this both in lyrics and the music. Some tracks, such as Hard as a Drum, has a rather happy tone in terms of the music, the pounding drum imitating the beating of a heart, as the title suggests, while the lyrics are trying to make the most out of a negative situation, saying that we need to keep in time with the beat of the world, despite difficult circumstances. Blue Moon is another good example of that point, where the verses have kind of a depressing tone, while the chorus has much more of an upbeat vibe. Tracks like these kind of have a seesaw effect where they go back and forth between sad and positive, but for the most part this album's lyrics are rather depressing. I mean, lines like "cut me down to size so I can fit inside," "lies you try to hide behind your eyes," just really goes to show that Beck has got a lot on his plate in terms of where he's at emotionally. Beck has always been really good at using very playful lyricism, even when the subject matter was somewhat miserable and melancholy. Very often on past albums, he was really good at being sarcastic on his records, but on here it's a little less subversive and more simplified, so you know exactly what he's feeling and what he's trying to say. That's not a bad thing. I mean, there's no need to make your lyrics super complex for the sake of trying to seem more autistic. Beck's lyrics, as usual, are on point, and the way he sings just really gives you a sense of how Beck is feeling on this record. Overall, I highly enjoy this album, absolutely a work of art, and just more great music from a really great artist like Beck. It's certainly a bit different, even in terms of his more folky work, perhaps because on this record he sort of takes that signature folk style of his and blends it with somewhat of a dream pop nature, giving it sort of a light psychedelic effect. Again, if you're hoping for something with some fast-paced tracks, then you're out of luck with this one. If you want that Beck, I would recommend Odelay or Midnight Vultures. This album is for if you want a more melancholy, somber, and acoustic Beck. And even though I say acoustic, this album is greatly string-laden, so expect to hear some really gorgeous music on here. Definitely recommend that you listen if you haven't, and if you want to, you should pick it up. Anyways, that does it for this another album review. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did enjoy, please hit that like button, also subscribe if you want to see more, and if there's a song or an album that you want to see reviewed on this channel, just leave a comment down below, or check out my Facebook or my Twitter. The links are in the description. But anyways, I will see you all in the next video. So long.